Hey everyone, this is the very first episode of the ArtLens Podcast, where we explore art, photography, spirituality, and what it means to create with purpose. I'm your host, Tyler Gathro, and since this is the very first episode, I thought it would probably be a good idea to introduce myself to all of you, and of course in later episodes I'll invite lots of guests to join us. But today I want to share a little bit of my story with you, from early childhood to art school to a moment of revelation, and eventually to building ArtLens Academy, which we have today. Now, believe it or not, I once almost gave up on art and image making entirely. So you're going to find out a little bit about that journey that brought me back and shaped everything that I do as an artist and a photographer and a teacher today. Now, I've invited my lovely wife, Sarah, to be with me. Thank you, Sarah, for joining. Believe it or not, I can talk a lot. And so Sarah's here to help keep me focused and kind of guide us through this little bit of a conversation. So I hope you enjoyed. So thank you, Sarah, for being willing to join me today on this. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Happy to help. I think it's a great idea to start with your story and introducing yourself and ultimately what brought you to ArtLens Academy. But a lot of the people listening here don't know your story, but I know a lot of it. And you've pretty much always known you wanted to be an artist from when you were a little kid. So can you share a little bit about what first drew you to art and creating artwork even as a young child? Share a little bit about that.
Oh, man. Yeah, I mean, I was creating images, drawing since the time I could hold a crayon. You know, I think my mom actually saved my first real big drawing when I was like 2 years old. I have an image of that. So it's interesting you asked what drew me to art making. I don't really know. All I could say is maybe it was like a God-given thing that came with me from birth. I found a lot of fulfillment and joy creating images, drawing, painting. Anytime I could get my hands on some art materials, I was like a giddy little kid. So yeah, I don't know why. What was it about art as a little kid? I don't know, but I've never wanted to do anything else. People would ask me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I just wanted to be an artist, nothing else. I mean, maybe there was a little 6-month period where I wanted to be an astronaut or something. I grew up in Florida, not too far from NASA, and I remember that was a kind of a thing. But no, for the most part, it was always I wanted to be an artist.
Yeah. So you had the chance to go to several art schools. In Jacksonville, they had magnet schools, right? So you got to go to an art middle school and an art high school. So can you talk a little bit about how your early education shaped you as an artist and how it influenced you?
Yeah, right. So when I was in 5th grade, I got to audition to get into an art middle school. Same thing when I was in 8th grade, I auditioned to get into the art high school as a specialty school. So like my high school didn't have any sports. I had no clue what homecoming was. Yeah. So but we had dance studios and sculpture gardens and sound recording studios, and I was surrounded by the arts from a young age. I really appreciate the art teachers that I had, the mentors that I had. I recognize that it is a rare opportunity for a high school kid, 15, 16 years old, to learn lithography and how to, and to do etchings, intaglio prints in an acid bath. I mean, those were things that I was able to do that a lot of people don't at that age. And so I don't take that for granted. The system that I was brought up in, and the teachers that I had, particularly in high school, they pushed me towards the sort of highbrow fine art world. That was what I grew up with. They would introduce me to contemporary artists, photographers, painters, sculptors, that were working today, at that time. Every year we would take a trip to some, as an art department in my high school, we would take a trip somewhere in the country to go to a national portfolio day, and we'd visit these art schools around the country, Art Institute of Chicago, Maryland Institute College of Art, etc. Right, and so I had an opportunity as early as 15 years old to start meeting with top tier art schools around the country and showing them my portfolio and my work. So that shaped me for sure. Maybe one more. Well, I'll go.
Well, I wanted to jump in and ask you how having exposure that early to these top tier portfolio reviews at such a young age, how that shaped the way you approached creating your own art portfolio. Because I think there's a lot of people who are listening who probably haven't had access to a high caliber top tier portfolio review like that. And I'm curious how that shaped you as an artist.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, in high school, we were always doing critiques, right? Like we would look at each other's artwork. You know, as a class, we put our artwork up on the wall, and our teacher would guide us through critiques, right? And the teachers would instruct on what does a portfolio look like? What do you want to include in a portfolio? What is that? What is a portfolio? And particularly as we're preparing to go to a national portfolio review as a teenager, my teachers would look at my work and say, okay, they would give suggestions on what to put in, what not to put in. I think those portfolio reviews as a teenager, standing in line for RISD, which is Rhode Island School of Design, or for the Cooper Union, or for the School of Visual Arts in New York, standing in line and then getting up to the table and having a representative from that school look at my portfolio, look at my drawings, my paintings, my prints, my photographs at that young age. I think it gave me a sense of, what are people looking for? What stands out? How do I fit in? I think that was a big thing. Because I would go to kind of I'd go to a review from a school that was almost a no-name school when it came to art, and they would look at my portfolio and say, "Wow, we'd love to have you. You would be one of the top at our school," right? And I'm like, well, I don't know if I'd want to be the top of your school as a freshman. I want something that's going to push me. And then I'd go to, say, the Cooper Union, and they'd almost tear me apart, and I was like, that's the school I want. From a young age, I wanted to push myself to be the best. And the school that was looking at my work saying, you're not quite there yet, I was like, okay, that's what I want. Right. But the schools that would they're like, oh, I'll take you, I wasn't interested.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. You had to learn at such a young age to be able to take critique and absorb it and use it in a positive way, which talk to me just really briefly about how important that is for artists who are listening.
Yeah. I think because visual arts is such a solitary experience for many, right? Of course, you can have collaborations and group work, but across the board, it's very common for visual artists to work by themselves as opposed to dancers, actors, musicians, etc., which is very much a group team effort. And so you can get stuck in your head when you're just in your studio making your work. You really need that feedback. You need to have a community. If you don't receive that feedback, you're not really sure if things are landing well, if things are fitting, if it's making sense, if it's resonating with other people. You have to have that feedback. And I think a lot of artists who didn't grow up with the experiences I had, or maybe they get into art later on in life after college and they decide, hey, I want to pick this up more. They've never had those kinds of experiences and they need them, and it's hard to come across those. It's hard to just find those kinds of communities, which I guess we'll get into later in this conversation, but that's one reason why ArtLens Academy exists, is to provide that for people.
Yeah, awesome. So I know this part of your story. I know faith and spirituality is like a key pillar of your life. And I also know that as an artist, you encountered from a really early age this tension between art and spirituality, or at least this perceived tension in the art world. So I'd love to hear you talk more about that.
Yeah, I guess I should say that I was brought up in a very religious home. Um, Faith was a real big part of my upbringing, and um, and so there was my art life, and then there was my faith life, right? And as any young kid, you're kind of trying to figure out what your life is going to look like, or you're trying to figure out life, as a preteen and as a teenager. And when I was about 14 is when I really felt like I was giving my life to Jesus Christ. That sort of my 14 years old was a time for me was a real change for me spiritually. Okay, so my spirituality became a real part of my life at that age. And of course, I'm in high school then, and I'm making art. And by the time you kind of get up to your junior, senior year, you're taking more advanced classes, and we're going to these national portfolio reviews, and we're talking about portfolios. And then there's these AP classes. It stands for Advanced Placement classes. They're like college level classes. And for the AP art classes, 2D design, AP drawing, you had to have a portfolio that was built around a concentration, is what they called it at the time. It was based around a theme. You had to have a body of 12 images, 12 works, kind of centered around an idea. And my faith was really important to me. So I thought, wow, man, how do I bridge these two? And I think that was the first time in my life I was wanting to put these things together, but didn't quite know how. And I wasn't taught about spiritual or religious art in public school. That wasn't really a thing. So I chose the theme of light, and I started to work with Braille, actually, which is interesting because I'm coming back to that now a lot recently. But I started to work with Braille and thinking about physical light and spiritual light. And anyway, so I started combining these things in my portfolio. And the people loved the work; they were resonating with it a lot, and that was great. And then I was accepted to college, to the Cooper Union School of Art, which is in New York City. And my drawing and painting teacher, she was an awesome mentor, great artist. I looked up to her, admired her, and I told her, I said, hey, I'm going to go to New York for school, but I'm only going to do 1 year, and after that I'm going to leave for 2 years to serve as a missionary, which we did my faith. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and so part of the faith is to serve as a 2-year mission. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go do that for 2 years, and then I'll go back and finish school. So I told this to her. I said, I'm going to take 2 years off and do that. And I remember distinctly this experience. We were on either side of her desk, and she was behind her desk, and she says, kind of essentially, that's ridiculous. Why are you doing that? You have been training for a gold medal. She used the Olympics as an analogy kind of thing. So you've been training, and if you're training to be a gold medalist at the Olympics, you don't just take off for 2 years, right? How are you going to come back and win a gold? No, you have to keep training. Like she thought it was a ridiculous idea to do that, and then she kind of she let me know that God doesn't even exist, so why do that? And that was the first time. I was taken back. I'm standing across from her desk, and I remember thinking, wow. Like, for one, I'm looking back on it now. I'm thinking, as a teacher, you probably shouldn't be saying that to a student. But I remember thinking, wow, there's a tension here between art and spirituality that I didn't realize. But that was my first encounter with that. Over the years, as time has gone by, I've come to realize that, religion and faith and spirituality and art in the art world are kind of like siblings. I feel like they love each other, but also hate each other. There's fights, and there's a symbiosis there that's interesting as I've studied that throughout the years.
So, a few things that you mentioned stood out, and it sounds like your mentor almost was presenting it as if like art is incredibly competitive, and if you're going to be serious about this has to be the only thing that, like, this has to be your focus. Yeah. And you did decide to serve a mission, and I would love to hear about how taking those 2 years away from art to serve a mission, how that shaped you. And again, I know your story, so I know that you picked up some really incredible benefits that are now key to your artwork.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear how those 2 years, how your mission shaped you, and personally, but specifically as an artist. How did taking those 2 years off to do something else important to you, how did that shape you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, I went to college, 18-year-old, not knowing if I could serve a mission, for one thing, if the school would let me, because it was very competitive, because I was on a full tuition scholarship. Worked my tail off. They let me go. I went and served in Los Angeles for 2 years. I went from New York City to LA, serving in Hollywood, Beverly Hills, Bel Air, Santa Monica, Compton, Watts, South Central. And I spent 2 years not making art. For the first time, I was always drawing, painting, making things since I was 2 or 3 years old. And so here I was, 19, 20, 21 years old, and I didn't make any, there's nothing. A couple drawings here and there for some people, but really nothing. My time was all spent serving people and helping them with their needs. And that was really, it was fulfilling, but it was interesting because I felt like I lost I felt like I wasn't true to my own identity, true to myself in some ways. I was trying to give myself fully to being a representative of Jesus Christ and serving people like he would serve, and saying, hey, I'm going to put aside my desires and my wants to serve other people. And there were some incredible benefits to that. I do not regret serving a mission at all. I'm so grateful for that time. I was able to, you're helping people with their health, with their finances, with their marriages, which is almost silly to say because it's like, here I was a 19, 20-year-old kid, but you're helping people with these really large life issues, and you're helping them develop their faith and learn about Jesus Christ and learn how to pray and, what it means to worship. And there was a lot of times I felt like God was guiding me and guiding my words. Okay, so all that said, beautiful experience as a missionary. How did that affect my art? That's your question.
Yeah, and can I jump in really fast? Because it's interesting as you're presenting this. It seems like as a missionary, you've still felt that tension between the art world and spirituality, as if in order to fully serve as a representative of Jesus Christ, I have to set art completely aside, their attention. And so talk to me about how the mission shaped your art, and lead me to the moment where, because I know that's not your perspective now.
Yeah.
Lead me to the moment where that tension, where you bridged those two, art and spirituality. So lead us from your mission, how that shaped you, and what led you to bridging the tension a bit.
Yeah. Yes, I love that. I think as a missionary, I do wish, just as a quick little side note, I do wish I had used my art more in helping people, in giving and serving. I wish I had used my art more and thought of ways to do that. But that wasn't the program of the church. That wasn't designed in the way that I was taught to be a missionary, and so I didn't incorporate that. But I will say, I got back from my mission, went back to New York City, and after having not done any art for 2 years, I returned to the Cooper Union School of Art in downtown Manhattan, and I felt very out of place. I felt lost. I'm back in this art world, which was my life, which felt very familiar to me before, and now I felt very out of place. And it took me quite a while to try to figure that out. In fact, the first month back as I was a sophomore, I was 21 years old, because I had taken 2 years off. I was 21, sophomore in college, and it was like a real crisis. It was like, what am I doing? What am I doing here? There are so many people suffering or in real need, who need repentance, who need forgiveness, who need, healing, who need Jesus Christ. Why am I'm making a drawing or a painting to put on a wall? Like what's the purpose? What's the value in that? And that was a real, I think it was a real concern. I started wrestling with, I think of the scriptures where we hear about Jacob wrestling with the Lord, or in the Book of Mormon where Enos wrestles with the Spirit all night. And I think that was me. It was like, it was on my mind. It was like, I was grappling with this day in and day out. And at that time let's see, first weekend of October is what we call a general conference. It's a worldwide conference. It's broadcasted globally out of Salt Lake City, which is headquarters of the church. And that was coming up, and I knew that was coming up, and I needed some guidance. I wanted some help with this question I had. Should I continue as an artist? What is the value of making images when there's all these other things, right? Can these things coexist? And so I prayed, I fasted, I went to the general conference, like, God, please help me. Give me some help. And I remember very clearly, I was living in Harlem at the time. I was living on 125th Street. There's a church just a few blocks north of there, on 5th Ave. And I went into the chapel. I sat down in the pew. The first speaker was Elder Richard G. Scott. And he spoke on revelation, receiving revelation. And I don't remember all the words he said, but I clearly remember this flood came through me. It was so clear. The thought in my head was so clear. It was go to the temple. Which is interesting, right? It wasn't an answer about art or anything, but it was go to the temple. Okay, but I knew that's what I had to do. Okay. So that was Saturday morning is when that happened. The temple wasn't open until Tuesday. So I think I probably went on Tuesday, but I went as soon as I could. So a few days later, I go to the temple. There's a temple at Columbus Circle. Not Columbus Circle, north of there. Lincoln Square in Manhattan. There's a temple kind of in the Lincoln Square area across from Juilliard. I go to the temple. I had been to the temple many times before. Now, a temple is different from a church, where a church is like your normal Sunday services. A temple, there's only a few temples in the world, at least at that time. There wasn't very many. And it's considered God's house more so than just a church. Much more of a sacred, holy place for worship. And so I went to the temple, and I had an experience unlike any other that I've ever had in my life. Everything that I was seeing came alive in a new way. The colors of the curtains, the reflection off of a table, the shape of the molding, or the way that the floor would slope upward in a gentle way. I mean, the architecture, the materiality of the temple, the visuals of the temple came alive and filled me in a way that I hadn't ever experienced before. And I'm getting kind of emotional right now. Think about it. Just because I remember it being very overwhelming, and I remember the distinct, I call it revelation. The revelation I received was the visual impacts the spiritual. Which you can think to yourself, yeah, duh. But it was so palpable for me in that moment. And it was the answer that I needed, because it was essentially God saying, hey, yes, the service that you did on your mission, yes, helping people in all these other practical ways matters, not negating those things, but I've given you a gift. You're really good at making images. I want you to use that gift. And guess what? Making beautiful images will help people, right? It impacts our souls, and we can think about that in the worlds around us. Our homes, the spaces that we're in, can either lift us up or bring us down. Images that we look at. On the opposite end of the spectrum, images that can bring you down. Think of all the negative effects of pornography and how that can destroy someone's life. So it was a revelation for me that keep doing what you're doing. Be an artist, because that has real value too.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That experience has really shaped your trajectory as a creator. Like that was a real turning point.
Yeah, because I was on the brink of giving up. I was like, I don't know if there's real value in this. And then it was like, no, there is value in this. And also, don't just make any images. Make images, make artwork that uplifts people and where people can feel God's love, where people can feel the Spirit, where, and there's lots of different ways. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation we can get into, but yeah.
Talk with me about the way that your new direction as an artist was received in the art community, because you were still going to art school at this time. You're still at the Cooper Union.
Yeah.
Talk about how that shift in what you were creating and why you were creating this bridging of art and spirituality was received.
I felt like at first it was really hard for me. I remember having that experience. This was October 2009, sophomore year of college. And I said, okay, I'm going to do this. So then I started. So I had classes where, I was very open to create whatever I wanted. And I started trying to make images about prayer or about the spirit body versus the physical body and different theological topics. And man, we have group critiques. So at the Cooper Union, we had group critiques where you would, every few weeks it would be your turn to present your work, and the class would gather around and we'd just talk about your work. And essentially that was the course. I mean, the whole class all semester long was just critiques. You work on your stuff, you get feedback on it. That was the class. It wasn't lecture style teaching, which is what happens at a lot of schools. And I remember feeling like, wow, this is like, I feel like I'm being persecuted. And not all the time, but in some of those critiques, where I was sort of pouring my soul into my work and having it be almost ridiculed or like, this is ridiculous. But at the same time, I will say, like, a normal student would get a 10 or 15 minute critique. And when I would put up my work, there would be discussions for 45, 50 minutes. And there were hot debates. And I would put up an image of a figure praying behind a veil or something. And there was a sense of the divine, what I thought divine in that image. And there would be hot debates, tension. And I remember one of my professors, I won't name him, but he said, just like my high school teacher, same thing. There's no God. So let's move on from that conversation. It was very much of like, okay, there's these great artists out there who are non-believers and think this is ridiculous. But then fast forward a few years. So, I gravitated to some of the technical arts, graphic design, photography. I started doing more of those where I felt like there was less of my I didn't have to put myself out there and be so vulnerable in my work. Fear of more persecution, maybe, I don't know. But I gravitated to that. I had a senior exhibition. I had a couple exhibitions, solo exhibitions my senior year. And I had an exhibition, and there was a guy who worked in the print lab. He was just a technician at the school. He worked in the print lab, and he was an artist as well, but he didn't teach. He wasn't a professor. And I remember during my solo exhibition, he saw it, right? And he came up to me and he said, "Have you ever heard about CIVA?" And I said, "What is this?" He says, it stands for Christians in the Visual Arts. It was an acronym, CIVA, which that organization had a long history, many, many years, and just a few years ago they closed down. They're no longer in operation. But he at the time was the president of that organization, which was a national organization, Christians in the Visual Arts. And here he was at the Cooper Union. He was a technician, and he came to me like, "Hey, I saw your show. Obviously, you're a Christian. Have you heard of this organization?" I said, "No." And he gave me a flyer, and he said, "You should join, and we should talk more about it." And so I saw the duality, right? My perception was, a lot of people in the highbrow New York fine art world were not, creating work that was about their faith or devout in their faith, or maybe they were complete atheist, maybe on one end of the spectrum. So anyway, so that it was interesting for me to kind of grow up and learn about this through college.
You've really had to learn how to navigate those tensions and navigate the fine art world when your work very clearly doesn't fit in necessarily with.
Yeah, I mean, I found those circles now, and I know how to navigate that now a little bit. But as a young artist, as a young kid, your early 20s in college, you're trying to figure this out, and I hadn't studied it. I didn't know about it. I didn't know where things were. So my those mentors, I had some really amazing teachers and mentors throughout college, people who I still look up to. But I learned that, wait a minute, there is sometimes a tension between art and spirituality. Right?
So after your time post-mission and your time in college, talk about the things you did differently as a creator, and talk about some of the different projects you've been involved in, some of the different things you've done in your career as a creator.
Yeah, so it's interesting. My entire life, I wanted to be a New York fine artist. I mean, I was 14. I thought, I'm going to go to New York. I'm going to go to Cooper Union for school, and I'm going to go to Yale and get my MFA at Yale, and I'm going to work as an artist in New York. I mean, that was my dream. And then that shifted. Actually when I was in college. Like I said, I got into photography. I did a study abroad, and I wanted to travel. I was always interested in traveling the world. And so my junior year, I had an opportunity to go to Jerusalem and study at a school called the Bezalel Academy of Art and Design, which is in Jerusalem up on the Mount of Olives. And it was there that I was introduced to documentary photography, landscape photography, other types of photography that I wasn't exposed to in New York. And I fell in love with the culture and the people and that environment, that region of the world. And so my senior year of college, I kind of made the decision, I think I want to be a documentary photographer, right? Which is very different from the fine arts. But I was very interested in studying and learning, researching. I wanted to travel. And a lot of that came from my time in the Middle East during that study abroad. So I graduated, left New York, and I actually worked for about 2 years as a documentary photographer in the Middle East, traveling around Egypt, Lebanon, Palestine, you name it, in the Persian Gulf a little bit as well. And I did, I worked for NGOs. I did some side projects. I worked on personal projects, tried getting funding. I had to bootstrap some of that myself. And incredible experiences, learning to tell stories, learning to, this cross-cultural communication, learning to go into a community, not knowing anything, doing the research, and then trying to capture these stories and tell people, tell a story of a person or of a neighborhood or of a place, which was all very informative, right? But I at this time, I was kind of drifting a little bit from, I want to be a full-time fine artist, right? And I was thinking, I kind of would like to be a filmmaker even, maybe, and tell stories with moving images. And I made a couple documentary films, started showing at some film festivals, and I loved reading, and I loved researching, I loved the history, and thought, man, I should go to graduate school, and I should study this more and learn, how do I do the research? How do I study? How do I be a better documentarian, a filmmaker, a photographer. I thought, man, that sounds really exciting. Traveling the world doing that sounds exciting. And so there was actually a program at Yale University, which is where I had originally always wanted to go. I wanted to go to Yale School of Art to get my MFA, and that kind of shifted a little bit. And I thought, I don't know if I should get an MFA, but there's another program at Yale called the Institute of Sacred Music and Arts. Kind of an interesting thing. It's not very common to have a program specifically about sacred arts. Mm-hmm. Right, so this is an institute they pulled from the School of Music and from the Divinity School. And so I actually got my master's in religion with a focus in visual arts. And it was during that time at Yale that as I'm researching, writing papers, and I took classes at the School of Art and classes at the Divinity School. And I loved my religion classes. I loved my material culture classes. But I realized I'm not cut out to be a professor, an academic professor in that way. I'm not cut out to be a researcher. That's not really what it was then that I was like, man, I'm really longing for making images. And the classes that I was taking in the art school, the photo classes, the filmmaking classes in the art school, was like, that's what I want to do. So I loved the research, and I loved, and writing the papers and researching was great. But I realized, no, I'm an artist. I need to make images. And I also realized, as much as I love traveling, it wasn't going to be conducive for a family life, which I wanted to get married. I wanted to have kids, and being a documentary photographer and traveling the world, I was going to be gone a lot. And I realized that's not what I want to do either.
So you had to explore several avenues to reconfirm, like, yes, image creation, that's where it's at.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you were able to pick up some pretty powerful storytelling tools along the way.
Yeah.
Which has really impacted your art now, right? Like your ability to tell compelling stories through your images. So post-grad school, you eventually made your way into teaching. And that has played a big role in your life as an artist and an image creator. And so talk to me about the contribution that teaching has made to you as an artist.
Yeah, great question. I will say, growing up, I admired my teachers, but I always thought, I don't want to be a teacher. And I think part of that was because I had this vision of I'm going to be a famous New York artist, right? That's kind of, and I thought, oh, teaching, that's secondary, which is so false. But I had this kind of thinking, and so I never wanted to be a teacher. I kind of looked down on, if you're an artist but you're teaching, you can't really make it as an artist. That was my thinking, which was a terrible thought. But when I was in graduate school in New Haven, you and I met, we got married, and you and I were part of a church where, for the first time, as you and I were in our 20s, and we're part of this family congregation, and there's these kids there in that congregation, and in our church, we don't have a paid ministry. It's a lay ministry, so it's volunteer work. So I was asked to volunteer as the youth pastor, what was called the young men's president. And as the young men's president, my job was to help kind of shepherd these young boys, ages like 11 or 12 to 18.
Yeah, and you discovered you loved it.
Yeah. It was like, I was 27 or so, 28 years old, 29. So I'm in my late 20s, and I'm working as an artist, as a photographer in New Haven. I was an event photographer for Yale University. I was creating art on the side of my own, selling the art. But then I was also this youth pastor and working with these boys, and I loved it. Like, they had an energy about them that was exciting. I would pick them up to go play basketball, and I would help them with their schoolwork. And a lot of these kids came from the inner city where they single parent homes. A lot of them didn't have, probably at least half of them didn't have a father figure in the house. And so I kind of became like a father figure. I was maybe more of like an older brother. I became like an older brother, and I just to kind of guide them in life. And I thought, man, being around teenagers was exciting. So we left New Haven. I ran a portrait studio, an art studio in Philly. We moved to Philly. But it was at that time I'm starting to think about maybe I should start teaching. Maybe I should try to start teaching. And again, there's this like voice in the back of my mind of like, no, don't teach, because if you teach, you're giving up on their dream of being a big artist. But I had to fight that and realize, no, like I liked being around young people, and maybe I could try that out. So we ended up moving closer to your family, moving out west, leaving the East Coast, and I thought that was a prime time to jump into something new and try it out. So I got a job teaching photography, actually, high school photography, and I, very much to my surprise, I fell in love with it.
Yeah, and you were good at it.
Yeah.
Really good at it. I mean, I remember that first year, your first year teaching, you had several students who went from, in your semester class, went from never picking up a camera before to winning awards in the end of your state show that was put on for high schools, which was incredible. And you came into a school where the photo department hadn't exactly been doing very well. And so it was a huge... it was incredible.
Yeah, and I started also teaching film photography, so we're doing film and digital. The school ended up getting rid of their darkroom. Unfortunately, they didn't want to fund it anymore. But so I was teaching film and digital, and loving that, and yeah, I enjoyed my time with the kids. I enjoyed teaching them lighting and storytelling and editing. And all this, and yeah, having students enter into competitions and shows and win awards, that was really really thrilling for me. So that was a shift, right? It was like, wow, okay, I do like this. And then I started teaching also at Salt Lake Community College, so I was teaching the college classes as well, and really enjoying that. And again, this is primarily digital photography is what I was teaching, but also helping the students build portfolios, right? And teaching, again, like the AP classes that I took when I was in high school, I was teaching those, okay, and helping students, how do I build a portfolio? How do I come up with themes and topics? And what do I want to investigate? And how do I investigate and explore materials and themes and ideas, and having those critiques. So I was doing the same thing that my teachers were doing, and I found a lot of fulfillment out of that, while also while also working on my own work and exhibiting my own pieces as well.
Yeah. And now in your career, you're at a point where you're launching ArtLens Academy. Yeah. So let's jump in there a little bit. What made you want to launch ArtLens Academy?
Yeah, so I've been teaching for 7 years at different locations. We moved across country back to New York City for you to go to graduate school. So we're in New York. I taught in New York City. And then back out west again, be closer to family, and so I taught at a few different locations, both at the high school level and collegiate level. And I enjoy teaching. I've really enjoyed that. I love seeing other photographers and other artists grow and have those aha moments and see what they can come up with and be able to guide them in their journeys and creative processes. So I wanted to keep doing that, but at the same time, I was finding that the education system that we have in this country, because I've taught in different states, is limiting. At a lower high school level, you're really limited on what you can teach. It's very, very regulated. At a collegiate level, you have more availability, but still you're confined to someone else's system, and you're also teaching locally just to those individuals, and which is great. And the one-on-one is definitely the way to go. You can really fast track someone in that way. But I realized, in today's world, I can have such a larger reach, and I can still help people one-on-one just via Zoom, right? I can have a larger reach. I don't have to follow other standards or curriculum.
Right,
sometimes.
like you can meet people right where they are with
right
exactly
where
what
jump
they
in.
need.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so ArtLens Academy allows me to reach a broader audience, teach to people's specific needs, and then to include the things that matter most to me and to others, right? The importance of supporting an artist, not just in their technical work or in their business, but also supporting an artist spiritually, emotionally, because creating art is such a spiritual experience for many artists, even if they're not a Christian or if they're not devout in a faith. There is a sort of sacredness to image making that I've heard a lot of people over the years. Now, I refer to those experiences back in college, but over my years and all of the traveling the country, traveling the world, and all the artists that I've met and photographers that I've met, there is like a commonality, this thread of image making can be a sacred experience. Mm-hmm. And so ArtLens Academy not only supports helping people technically or developing their artistic voice and their portfolios and their business and marketing and getting their work out there, but it continues to support the artists through their own emotional struggles that we go through as artists, and through the spiritual components of art making as well. So
yeah, I want to circle back to a point that we brought up earlier in the conversation about community and the importance of community, because I think one additional thing the ArtLens Academy is offering really has to do with community, and I think that's really exciting. So can you talk more about the community that ArtLens Academy is going to provide, and how that offers something to artists that I think you've expressed previously you wish you had during those periods when you weren't actively enrolled in an art program, for example?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, if you go to art school, you learn how to make the work, you learn the technical skills, and you have the critiques, right? And that's really valuable. And you network with people, and you get to know, with any school, but then you leave art school, and it's like, okay, if I don't have a group of friends that I can get with to like talk about the work, what do you do, right? I think there's a lot of people who don't have a community where they can get that feedback, where they can get those critiques. It's hard to find. You have to kind of search in your local community, and it may not exist. I've experienced that myself, trying to find groups to have, hey, I need some feedback. I'd love some feedback on this, and it's hard to get. So in designing ArtLens Academy, I feel like that's critical. We need to have group critiques. We need to be able to give each other feedback in a positive environment where we're all trying to support each other. I think that's really important. So ArtLens Academy is new. We're still growing. Our community is going to continue to grow. But those who join will be part of that community where they can see other people's work. They can get feedback on other people's work. They can get feedback on their own work. But not only that, but just be a support to each other, because being an artist and making images is such a solitary experience for so many artists. That getting together with other photographers, getting together with other artists, it's really exciting. It's like, hey, you're not alone, and hey, what are you working on? Right? And so, I encourage everybody, wherever you are, whatever city you're in, you could be in Houston or Cleveland or wherever, try to find a community, an artist community in your own city to be a part of. That's really important. I'm a part of an artist community here where I live, and having that network and that support where it's like, hey, what are some exhibitions coming up, or here's this competition, right? And you can kind of share those things with each other, and then also have those feedback on each other's work, and that's really valuable.
Yeah, and that's what you're designing ArtLens Academy to be able to contribute, right?
Yeah, so ArtLens Academy will have the teaching component, right? There's video modules, there's courses there, but it's not just a course. I would say it's not a course, it's a program, right? Because yes, there's these video modules and you can go through those and learn, right? But on top of that, there's the community aspect, which is huge, because we'll do, we have calls, we get together, right? And we build that community together. We give each other that feedback, that support, that network. And that's a huge component. Yeah.
So ultimately, if you had to sum it up, what do you hope ArtLens Academy will give to other artists?
So many people are at different stages in their journey. And I want to be able to help as many people as I can. And so whether you're in the stage where you're just learning the craft, right? ArtLens Academy will help you do that. It'll help you learn the craft. It'll help you refine your vision, really see the world in new ways, to be able to narrate and tell stories, to be able to build your business, right? And then be able to grow as an artist, showing your work, making the living that you want to live, right? I mean, I don't want anybody to be a starving artist. I want people to thrive. I want artists to thrive and be making, at least 6 figures as an artist, and be able to provide for their families and have a thriving life and enjoy all that life has to offer as an artist. And so that's my goal is to help artists at whatever phase they're at, support them, teach them, guide them, and a big part of who I am as an artist is also my faith. And so that's part of what you're getting, right? Because there are other art instructors and art coaches you could choose out there. But I think because of my experiences, because of my faith, I know that, again, the visual impacts the spiritual, that when we make images, we can have an impact on the world for good, right? And I think that's our duty. Being an artist is not just a career, it's a calling. And a lot of artists feel that way. That's different from being a dentist or a lawyer or something, or an accountant, where it's like, oh, that's a job. It's a career. But if you ask an artist, it's like, it's not just a job. It's not. And I mean, that goes for dancers and musicians as well. People who are in the creative space often feel that. And I think all the photographer and artist friends that I have, they feel that. They say, oh, it's not just a career, it's a calling. And so my hope and my work is to help artists in their calling. Yeah. So yeah, I think that kind of about sums it up. Anything else?
Yeah, I think that was a great overview of your story, and a really great presentation or snapshot of what ArtLens Academy can offer people.
Yeah, and thanks for joining me, Sarah. I know, it's not always you see me working and doing all these things.
See all the behind the scenes.
You see she sees all the behind the scenes. That's right. But thanks for being willing to sit in on this and help guide me through some of this conversation. I just want to say to the camera here, to all of you listening and those of you watching this on YouTube or wherever else it may be, if this helped you at all, if you enjoyed listening to this conversation, please subscribe. There'll be more incredible podcasts to come. I know this is just our first episode, but I've already got some guests lined up for some additional episodes, and I'm very excited for what the future has in store there. Also, if you're interested in ArtLens Academy, you can check out, I'll put the link at the bottom here, but at artlensacademy.com, where you can find out more information and we can join our community and get all the help that you need. So looking forward to seeing you there. Thanks so much for watching, and take care.